It was one of those crisp October mornings that Madison was known for, the kind where the air smelled faintly of pine and chimney smoke, and every breath carried a whisper of coming frost. In the small wooden house at the end of Eastwood Hills, Kate Walker moved slowly through her morning ritual. The kettle whistled softly, the birds pecked at the feeder outside her kitchen window, and the sunlight filtered through the lace curtains in fractured gold. She wrote the date neatly in her notepad, October 12th. Next to it, she scribbled a reminder, called travel agent. Door County. It was supposed to be her first real trip since retiring. After 35 years of teaching third graders, she had finally learned to enjoy silence. Her days were simple: morning walks, crossword puzzles, a bit of gardening before the cold set in. There was comfort in the routine, in the small domestic sounds that didn't demand anything from her. That morning, she allowed herself to imagine the quiet lakeside cottage she would soon visit, the autumn leaves floating like sparks across the water. For the first time in years, life felt calm. Then the phone rang. She hesitated for a moment, watching the screen light up with a name she rarely saw: Vanessa, her daughter-in-law. Kate felt the muscles in her back tense, an instinctive reaction. Calls from Vanessa rarely brought good news. They brought orders, complaints, or subtle insults dressed as concern. Still, she answered, because that's what decent people did. Vanessa. Kate, good, you picked up. Listen, I'm leaving for Miami tomorrow morning. Business trip. Very important. The woman's voice was brisk, almost rehearsed. I need you to watch the kids for 2 weeks. Kate straightened in her chair. Tomorrow? That's very short notice. I'm actually leaving for Door County this weekend. A pause crackled through the line, followed by a light, dismissive laugh. Door County. Oh, come on, Kate. It's not like you're busy. You're retired. You've got nothing better to do. The words landed with a sting sharper than she expected. For a second, Kate couldn't breathe. She looked around the small kitchen, the worn wooden table, the teacup her husband once carved her initials into, the fading family photo on the wall. All the things that had once felt enough suddenly seemed to shrink under Vanessa's careless tone. I'm sorry, Vanessa, she said quietly, but I'm not sure that's possible. You should have asked Robert. He's their father. Robert's working double shifts. You know that. You always make things difficult. Vanessa's voice hardened. I'm already doing everything for this family, and the least you could do is help with your own grandchildren. Kate closed her eyes. There it was again. That guilt Vanessa knew how to play like a violin. She could almost picture her smirk on the other end of the line. Perfectly manicured nails, tapping impatiently. Finally, Kate exhaled slowly. Fine, she said. Drop them off tomorrow morning. Perfect. I knew you'd come around, Vanessa replied, her tone instantly sweet again. You're a lifesaver. Love you. And just like that, the call ended. No thank you, no discussion, no trace of sincerity. Kate placed the phone down, the silence in the kitchen now heavier than before. Outside, a gust of wind sent a swirl of leaves tumbling across the porch. She stood there for a long moment, looking out the world she had built, a quiet, ordered world that someone like Vanessa would never understand. She took a sip of her tea. It had gone cold. Somewhere, deep in her chest, the old teacher in her stirred, the one who never tolerated arrogance or cruelty, the one who believed every lesson needed to be learned, even by those who thought they were above it. Kate Walker wasn't angry. Not yet. But as she turned her notepad to a blank page and began to write new notes, prepare guest rooms, buy groceries, lock away documents, a calm certainty settled over her. This time, things would not go the way Vanessa expected. That evening, after hanging up the phone, Kate sat by the window and watched the sky darken over Madison. The maple trees outside glowed faintly in the streetlights, their leaves fluttering like fading memories. She wrapped her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, and her thoughts drifted, back to a time when silence in her house didn't hurt. She had been 29 when the accident happened. Her husband, Michael, was on his way home from the hardware store when a semi lost control on the icy highway. The police officer who came to her door spoke gently, but she only remembered the sound of his boots leaving the porch, heavy, final. That night, while the world slept under a blanket of snow, Kate sat on the floor beside her sleeping son, whispering promises into the dark. "I'll take care of you, Robbie. I'll make sure you never go without." And she kept that promise. For years, her life became a pattern of exhaustion and purpose. She taught third grade at Roosevelt Elementary during the day, then tutored neighborhood kids at night to pay for the heating bills. Every dollar had a destination. Shoes, books, a small savings jar labeled college fund. On weekends, she'd pack peanut butter sandwiches and take Robert to Lake Mendota, pretending it was a vacation. Those were good years, poor but full of laughter. When Robert grew older, she saw in him the same steadiness that had once drawn her to his father. He studied engineering at the University of Wisconsin, working part-time to cover his own expenses. She was proud of him, of his quiet ambition, his kindness. Then one Thanksgiving, he brought home a girl, Vanessa Clark. Kate remembered that first meeting with startling clarity, the way Vanessa shook her hand like she was sealing a deal, her perfume too strong for the small kitchen, her laughter filling every corner. She was beautiful, confident, the kind of woman who turned heads in grocery aisles. Kate liked her at first. She wanted to. She thought Vanessa's presence might bring warmth and energy into Robert's world. When they got engaged, Kate helped plan the wedding. She even dipped into her savings to cover the catering deposit. Robert tried to stop her, but she smiled and said, "It's what mothers do." But after the vows were spoken and the photos framed, something in Vanessa changed. She began correcting Kate's manners in front of others, rolling her eyes at her thrift store dresses, suggesting she upgrade her house if she wanted to host family dinners. Once, when Kate brought homemade jam as a gift, Vanessa said, "That's cute. My mom uses imported ones from France." The distance widened quietly. First, fewer phone calls. Then, excuses on holidays. When Kate called the house, Vanessa answered with clipped politeness, always busy. Robert followed her lead. Years slipped by in half-hearted visits and polite conversations that ended too quickly. Christmas dinners became silent affairs where even the ticking clock sounded loud. Kate learned to fill the quiet with knitting, with books, with long walks where no one expected her to speak. She told herself she didn't need their company, that she was fine on her own. But sometimes, when she passed the schoolyard and saw other mothers surrounded by their grown children and grandchildren, something deep inside her ached. Now, sitting alone in her warm but empty kitchen, Kate realized she had grown used to a new kind of silence, not the peaceful kind she once cherished, but the kind that comes when you've been gently pushed out of your own family's life. And tomorrow that silence was about to end. Kate couldn't remember the exact moment things had truly fallen apart, because it hadn't been one explosion, but a series of small, calculated humiliations, each one subtle enough to seem excusable, but sharp enough to leave a mark. The first time was on Robert's birthday, 2 years after his wedding. Vanessa had organized a party at their new suburban home, a place filled with white furniture, abstract paintings, and a smell of candles that never quite masked the scent of money. Kate had shown up early with a smile and a plate of her son's favorite oatmeal cookies, the kind she used to bake when he was a boy. Vanessa opened the door, immaculate in her silk blouse and diamond earrings, and blinked as if Kate's presence were an inconvenience. "Oh, I thought I mentioned it was more of a cocktail thing," she said, her voice sugary sweet. "No need for homemade treats, but thanks." An hour later, Kate watched as Vanessa's friends, young, polished women in heels, laughed over champagne while her cookies sat untouched on the counter. Robert, moved between groups. Polite but distant. When she finally caught his eye, he gave her a weary half-smile, the kind that said, "Please don't make a scene." It was a small moment, but it stayed with her long after the party ended. Then came Christmas. Kate had spent the entire afternoon baking an apple pie, the same recipe her husband used to love. She wrapped it in foil, tucked it into a box, and took the city bus to their house through falling snow. When she arrived, Vanessa greeted her with a flawless smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We already have dessert," she said, glancing at the pie. "But you can leave it in the kitchen." Later, as Kate helped clear the table, she saw the pie, untouched, still in its foil, resting on top of the trash can. Vanessa must have tossed it there after dinner, right before the guests arrived. "Old people's food," she had murmured under her breath earlier when her friends were around. Kate had pretended not to hear, but the words settled like frost against her skin. Robert had been there too, sitting beside her, staring into his glass of wine, saying nothing. That silence hurt more than the insult. There were other moments, too, little ones that piled up until they became a quiet mountain of shame. The way Vanessa corrected her pronunciation in front of others. How she rolled her eyes when Kate offered to babysit, saying, "It's okay. They like being around people their own age." The worst came one summer evening during a backyard barbecue. Vanessa had invited her colleagues, real estate agents, all loud and smiling, and introduced Kate with a laugh. "This is my husband's mom," she said. "She's retired now. Teaches knitting classes at the community center." Everyone chuckled politely and Kate forced a smile. She didn't correct her. She didn't say that she'd been an educator for 35 years, that she'd built futures for hundreds of children, that she'd once been proud of the work she did. She just stood there holding her paper plate, feeling smaller than she had in decades. After that night, she stopped visiting. She told herself it was to give them space, to avoid tension. But the truth was simpler. She couldn't bear to watch her son pretend not to notice her being diminished in her own family. Still, she kept sending birthday cards every year. Bright ones with handwritten notes, small stickers, sometimes even $5 bills tucked inside for the kids. She never got a call, not even a thank you note. Once, when she mailed Sophia a children's book, the package was returned unopened. And yet she never stopped, because a part of her, stubborn, foolish, maternal, still believed that kindness might eventually find its way through. That belief lasted until the morning her phone rang and Vanessa's name lit up the screen. This time, Kate didn't hope for kindness. She only hoped for clarity. The following Saturday morning was pale and cold, the kind of Midwest day that never quite woke up. A gray sky hung low over Madison, and a thin layer of frost still clung to the porch railing when the sound of car tires crunching over gravel reached Kate's ears. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and peered through the window. Vanessa's silver SUV gleamed in the driveway like something out of another world. Too loud, too polished for the quiet street where Kate had lived her whole life. The car door slammed, and then came the voices, sharp and patient, familiar only through the echo of long silences. 3 children spilled out. Diego first, tall for his age and already carrying his mother's air of superiority. Sophia, eyes hidden behind a pair of oversized sunglasses. And little Matt, dragging a suitcase almost as big as he was. Vanessa followed, her phone in hand, speaking rapidly into her Bluetooth headset as though the world might collapse if she stopped for a breath. "Okay, guys, remember, Grandma's house. 2 weeks," Vanessa said, pulling out her sunglasses, even though the sun hadn't appeared. "Behave, don't break anything, and for heaven's sake, don't make a mess. I'll be back before you know it. Promise?" Matt asked softly. Vanessa barely looked at him. "Of course, sweetheart," she said, though her tone was distracted, her attention already drifting back to the glowing screen in her hand. When she finally looked up, she gave Kate a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks again, Kate. I really appreciate this." Kate nodded. Drive safely. And that was it. No quorums, no conversation. Within seconds, the SUV reversed down the driveway, leaving behind the smell of exhaust and a silence that felt unfamiliar in Kate's little house. Inside, the children stood awkwardly in the doorway, their eyes scanning the small living room as if it were an exhibit in a museum they didn't want to visit. "Grandma's house smells weird," Diego muttered, wrinkling his nose. "It smells old," Sophia corrected, rolling her eyes dramatically, "like dust and books." Matt said nothing. He just clutched a stuffed bear, the only thing in the room that looked like comfort. Kate forced a small smile. "Well, that's what happens when you live long enough to collect both," she said gently. "Come in, everyone. You must be cold." The children moved hesitantly, still guarded, their voices bouncing off the wooden walls as they unpacked their gadgets, tablets, headphones, a portable gaming console. Within minutes, the air filled with the artificial sounds of digital chaos. Kate watched them from the kitchen doorway, her hands resting on the counter, her heart aching at how foreign they felt. She had imagined this moment for years, the day she might finally spend time with her grandchildren. But she hadn't imagined it like this. Not as strangers, sharing a roof. Not as the woman they'd been taught to look down on. That night, after the house fell quiet, Kate sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea. The moonlight slanted through the blinds, cutting across her lined hands. She stared at her notepad, the same one where she used to write lesson plans, and began jotting down small observations. Diego withdrawn, defensive. Sophia sarcastic, restless. Matt anxious, quiet. Then she picked up the phone and called the only person she trusted with her thoughts. Carol Jensen, her old friend from Roosevelt Elementary. Carol had been a school counselor for 30 years and had seen every kind of family crisis imaginable. Vanessa dropped them off without warning. Carol asked, her tone both calm and knowing. Typical. "Kate, you need to protect yourself and those kids. Document everything. Every message, every call, every little thing that feels off. If this woman's neglect continues, child services will need a record." Kate listened, her thumb tracing the rim of her teacup. "I don't want to start a war." "Carol." "You won't," Carol said. "You're not fighting. You're teaching. Some lessons just take longer to reach their students." When the call ended, Kate closed her notebook and sat in the dark for a while. Her heart was heavy, but beneath the ache was something steadier, a quiet resolve she hadn't felt in years. For most of her life, she'd written lesson plans for classrooms full of children. Now, for the first time, she was writing one for her own family. By the fourth night, the rhythm of the house had changed. The constant hum of video games and notifications had quieted into something gentler, still restless, but manageable. Kate had begun to learn her grandchildren's language. Diego's silence wasn't defiance. It was confusion. Sophia's sarcasm was armor. Matt's endless questions were a way of filling the emptiness left by his mother's absence. The first hint that something was wrong came on a Wednesday evening. Kate was in the kitchen, ladling soup into bowls, when she noticed Diego sitting by the window, his face illuminated by the cold blue glow of his phone. He wasn't playing a game this time, he was whispering. His shoulders were tense, his thumb flying over the screen, eyes darting toward the hallway as if afraid of being seen. "Dinner's ready, sweetheart," she said softly. "Yeah, just a sec." Kate placed the ladle down and watched him for a moment. The conversation ended quickly, and he shoved the phone into his hoodie pocket, guilt flickering across his face. That night, while Sophia and Matt slept, Kate knocked lightly on Diego's door. "Mind if I come in?" He shrugged, eyes glued to his screen again. "It's fine." She sat on the edge of his bed, her tone easy, like a teacher coaxing a shy student. "You know, when your dad was your age, he used to hide his comic books under the mattress. Thought I didn't know." Diego looked up, suspicious but curious. Did you tell on him? No, she said, smiling faintly. I just waited until he trusted me enough to show me. Silence filled the space between them, soft and cautious. Then, almost unexpectedly, Diego sighed. It's just Mom. She texts me a lot. Of course, Kate said gently. She misses you. He shook his head. No, it's weird stuff. She keeps saying not to talk about her trip. Or Grandma shouldn't look through my phone. He hesitated, then handed it over, like a secret he was tired of keeping. Kate didn't want to invade his privacy, but when she scrolled through the messages, her breath caught. The texts weren't between Vanessa and her son. They were with someone saved as Chris. The tone was intimate, laced with affection and planning. He's so clueless. Once we get the paperwork started, he'll have no choice. The house is worth over 400 grand. Half will be mine. And then one message that made Kate's heart go cold. If we file for custody, I'll say Robert's emotionally unstable. Everyone will believe me. Kate scrolled further, voice recordings, selfies from a hotel room, snippets of conversation that painted a clear picture of betrayal. Her son had no idea. She exhaled slowly, the years of classroom patience returning instinctively. Thank you for trusting me, Diego. You did the right thing. What are you going to do? He asked quietly. Nothing yet, she said. But sometimes doing nothing right away is part of doing something, right? After Diego went to bed, Kate transferred the evidence, screenshots, audio clips, and chat logs to a USB drive. She labeled it simply Documents Family. Then she printed several key screenshots and tucked them into a manila folder hidden beneath old lesson plans in her desk drawer. Her hands trembled slightly, but her mind was clear. Years of structure, of discipline, of planning. Every instinct she'd honed as a teacher returned in perfect order. In the days that followed, something unexpected began to shift in the house. Maybe it was the smell of homemade meals, or the calm rhythm of her voice when she read bedtime stories. But the children started to soften. Sophia, once distant and restless, began lingering in the kitchen, watching Kate cook. Can I help? She asked one evening, awkwardly chopping carrots too thick, but trying anyway. Of course, Kate said, handing her an apron. We'll fix them together. Later, when Matt yawned and curled into her lap, he whispered, Good night, Grandma Katie. The name caught her off guard. It wasn't the first time she'd been called Grandma, but it was the first time it felt like a bridge being rebuilt, plank by plank, with every act of patience and love. Kate tucked him in, then stood by the doorway, watching the three of them sleep. Her heart ached with both love and anger. Love for these children, and anger at what their mother had done to all of them. She turned off the light and whispered into the quiet, You can lie to a man, Vanessa, but you can't lie forever to his children. Then she went back to her desk, poured herself a cup of tea, and opened her notepad again. On a fresh page, she wrote just one line. Lesson 2. The truth always shows itself in the shadows. It happened on a gray Thursday afternoon, when the sky over Madison looked heavy enough to break. Kate was in the kitchen, setting plates for lunch, when she heard the first crash, ceramic shattering against the hardwood floor. She froze. In the living room, Diego stood beside the coffee table, chest heaving, his phone glowing in his hand. Sophia was yelling something about privacy, while little Matt cowered near the couch, clutching his stuffed bear. What on earth? Kate began, stepping forward. Diego turned, his eyes bright with anger. Why do you keep snooping? You're not Mom. You don't get to tell us what to do. Sophia jumped in, her voice trembling but sharp. Mom says you're just trying to turn us against her, that you're a burden, someone Dad feels sorry for. The words hit harder than she expected, not because they were new, but because she could hear Vanessa's voice through them, every syllable rehearsed, every insult passed down like a family heirloom. Kate took a slow breath. She didn't shout, didn't slam her hands or cry. She simply turned toward the shelf, opened the drawer, and took out a small voice recorder. "Since you trust your mother's words," she said softly, pressing play, "you should hear them for yourselves." For a moment, there was only static. Then came Vanessa's voice, clear, cold and cruel. "She's pathetic, Diego. Always acting noble. I swear, if she weren't Robert's mother, I'd never let her near the kids. You know what she said about me last time? That I was selfish. Please, she's the one who ruined her own life." The silence that followed was suffocating. Matt's eyes filled with tears. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth, trembling. Diego stood frozen, his phone slowly lowering as confusion and shame replaced his anger. "Turn it off," he muttered, his voice cracking. Then, louder, "Turn it OFF." He stormed out the back door, slamming it so hard the windows rattled. Sophia burst into tears and ran after him, while Matt sat on the rug, crying quietly into his bear. Kate didn't chase them. She simply stood there, the recorder still in her hand, her heart breaking for all of them. That evening, as dusk fell and the world outside turned blue, the doorbell rang. Kate wiped her hands on her apron and opened it to find a woman standing on the porch. Early 40s, neat hair, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Walker? I'm Laura Adams from Wisconsin Child Protection Services. We received a call from a neighbor about possible neglect. Mind if I come in?" Kate blinked, then nodded calmly. "Of course. Please, come in out of the cold." Laura stepped inside, glancing around the modest living room. The scent of soup lingered in the air. Soft music playing faintly from the kitchen radio. Sophia sat curled on the couch, still sniffling. Diego, now quieter, sat beside her, head down. Matt colored silently at the table. Laura's tone softened. "They seem well cared for." "They're good kids," Kate replied, setting a teacup on the table. "Just confused." Laura nodded, taking notes. "Their mother's been away for how long?" 11 days now, Kate said, her voice even. "I haven't heard from her since she left for Miami." Laura jotted something on her clipboard, but didn't press. She could see enough: the tired children, the calm order of the home, the woman standing in front of her with quiet dignity and no resentment in her voice. As they talked, Sophia wandered over and slipped her hand into Kate's. It was a small gesture, but Laura noticed. When the visit ended, the social worker closed her notebook and smiled faintly. "If I may, Mrs. Walker, you seem to have things well under control. I'll file a routine report. Nothing to worry about." Kate walked her to the door. "Thank you, Ms. Adams. Would you like a thermos of tea for the road?" Laura hesitated, then smiled. "You know what? I would." When she left, the house was quiet again, too quiet, but peaceful. Kate stood by the window, watching the taillights fade into the night. She didn't know who had called CPS, but maybe it didn't matter. Someone had seen something and cared enough to reach out. Maybe, just maybe, the world still had eyes for the truth. She turned off the lights, whispering to herself. Lesson 3. Sometimes the truth needs witnesses. The days that followed felt like a slow thaw after a long winter. The tension that had once filled every corner of the house began to dissolve, replaced by something gentler, hesitant at first, but real. The children no longer avoided her eyes. The screens that once separated them from the world started to gather dust on the coffee table. It began with small things: Diego offering to take out the trash without being asked, Sophia setting the table with mismatched silverware, Matt feeding the birds outside with quiet fascination. Kate didn't praise them too much. She knew trust was a fragile thing. Instead, she smiled, thanked them softly, and carried on as if kindness had always belonged there. In the evenings, laughter returned. Not loud or forced like Vanessa's parties, but the quiet, genuine kind that bubbled up unexpectedly. Matt giggled at her old stories from the classroom. Sophia began to help her bake, dusting herself in flour and pretending not to enjoy it. Diego, who had once hidden behind his phone, started asking about his father's childhood, what he was like before life became so complicated. "Your dad loved building things," Kate told him one night as they sat by the fireplace. "Once he built a go-kart out of scrap wood and a broken stroller. We crashed it into Mrs. Henson's fence, and he spent 2 weeks fixing it as an apology." Diego laughed, a full, unguarded laugh that warmed the room. "Sounds like Dad." "Yes," Kate said softly. "He's still that boy. He just needs someone to remind him." 2 days later, Robert showed up unannounced. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, the kind that come from sleepless nights and unanswered questions. When he stepped inside, he stopped short, staring at the scene before him. Sophia and Matt sitting at the kitchen table, coloring. Diego quietly stirring a pot of soup under Kate's supervision. The house, once heavy with silence, felt alive again. "Mom," he said quietly, almost in disbelief. "They look happy." Kate wiped her hands and smiled, though her heart tightened. Children only need a little love and structure. The rest comes naturally. Over tea, she finally showed him the folder she had hidden for days, the screenshots, the printed messages, the recordings. Robert listened in silence, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly as he read his wife's words. "Mom, I can't believe this," he said, voice cracking. "She was going to take the kids. She was going to—" Kate reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Don't act in anger. Act in truth. You taught your children to be honest. Now it's time you live by that lesson too." He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening, not with rage but resolve. The next morning, they drove downtown to meet Edward Martinez, a calm, sharp-eyed attorney who had handled many custody cases. He listened carefully, took notes, and promised to start the legal process discreetly. "You've done the hardest part," he said to Kate. "You've built the evidence without crossing any legal lines." From there, they met Dr. Patricia Lee, a child psychologist referred by the school district. She agreed to evaluate the children for emotional trauma. "They've been neglected emotionally for years," she said gently after meeting them. "But I see resilience, especially in Sophia, and their connection with you, Mrs. Walker. It's strong. Keep nurturing it." Kate nodded, though her throat felt tight. She wasn't used to hearing herself praised for something as simple as love. That night, after the children had gone to bed, she sat on the porch with Robert. The sound of crickets hummed through the cool Wisconsin air. Inside, soft music drifted from the radio, something slow and old, a song she used to dance to with Michael decades ago. Robert leaned back in his chair. "I don't deserve you, Mom." Kate looked at him, her voice gentle but steady. "You don't have to deserve me, Robert. You just have to be the man your father believed you could be." He nodded, eyes glistening in the porch light. And for the first time in years, Kate's home wasn't silent. It was filled with the sound of laughter, of pencils scratching across paper, of life rebuilding itself one heartbeat at a time. The quiet was still there, but now it was the kind that comforted, not the kind that hurt. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Sophia slipped into the kitchen, still in her pajamas, her hair a messy halo around her face. The others were asleep, and the only sound was the gentle tick of the wall clock and the faint rustle of birds outside. Kate was stirring oatmeal on the stove when she noticed the little girl hovering by the doorway, biting her lip like someone carrying a secret too heavy for her age. "Morning, sweetheart," Kate said softly, turning off the stove. "You're up early." Sophia hesitated before stepping closer. "Grandma, can I tell you something? But you can't get mad." Kate wiped her hands on a towel and sat down. "You have my word." Sophia's voice came out in a whisper. "Mom has another phone. She hides it in the blue suitcase in her closet. I saw her once. She was recording Dad on it. She said it was for when she'd need proof. But she also used it when she was talking to that man, Chris. Kate's heart tightened, though she kept her face calm. You did the right thing by telling me, Sophia. She said bad things about Dad, Sophia went on. And about you. She said we'd all live in Florida soon, just her, me, and the boys. But I don't want to go there. I like it here. Kate reached over and took the girl's trembling hands in hers. You won't have to go anywhere you don't want to. I promise. Later that day, when Robert left for work and the children were at the park, Kate called Carol Jensen. Her friend's voice, steady as ever, carried both empathy and quiet efficiency. Another phone? Carol asked. Then we'll find a way to get what's on it. Carefully. Legally. By the next afternoon, Carol stopped by with her old laptop and a portable drive. Together, they set up in Kate's small dining room, blinds drawn, the air thick with nervous anticipation. Kate produced the hidden phone, retrieved discreetly during a brief visit to Vanessa's house the previous evening. She'd gone under the pretense of picking up the kids' school supplies while Robert distracted the realtor handling Vanessa's rental listing. Let's see what she's hiding, Carol murmured, plugging it in. What they found made Kate's stomach twist. There were recordings, some from Miami, others from weeks earlier. Vanessa's voice, cold and deliberate, laid everything bare. Robert won't fight me. He's too soft. Once I say he's unstable, I'll get full custody. Then I can sell the house. Split the profit with Chris, start fresh. Another clip followed, laughter, the clinking of glasses, and a man's voice saying, You're brilliant, babe. He'll never see it coming. Carol looked up, her face pale. Kate, this is enough to destroy her case. Kate exhaled, steady but sad. We're not destroying her, Carol. We're protecting the children. The next morning, Kate and Robert met attorney Edward Martinez again, this time in his office downtown. The man listened carefully, his sharp eyes narrowing as he played each recording. This is substantial, he said finally. I'll file for an emergency custody protection order today. From now on, Vanessa can't remove the children from the state without a court's approval. And we'll use this evidence to build a full case of fraud and emotional abuse. Robert leaned back, his face pale. I don't understand how she could do this to her own family. Martinez glanced at Kate, then back at him. People like her confuse control with love. The court will see that. When they left the office, Robert walked in silence beside his mother. Outside, the city wind cut sharp against their faces, scattering orange leaves across the sidewalk. I want to confront her, he said finally, but not like before. I won't yell. I won't lose my temper. I just need her to see what she's done. Kate nodded, her expression calm, resolute. Then that's what we'll do. We'll let the truth speak for itself. That night, as she sat by her window, the old teacher in her returned once again. Not the one who lectured, but the one who understood that every mistake, every cruelty, carried a lesson waiting to be learned. She whispered into the quiet, her reflection pale in the glass. This isn't revenge, she said. It's correction. And sometimes, the hardest lessons are the ones that save us. The first snow of the season had just begun to fall over Madison that Sunday afternoon, turning the streets into a soft blur of white and quiet. Inside Kate Walker's small wooden house, the air was heavy with anticipation. The curtains were drawn, the tea on the table untouched. Kate sat in her armchair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, calm in the way only someone who had already accepted the truth could be. Across from her sat Robert, tense but steady, his jaw set. Beside him, attorney Edward Martinez reviewed the neatly organized folder of documents, printed messages, financial statements, and recordings. Everything was ready. All that remained was the arrival of the woman who had turned their home into a battleground of deceit. At exactly 3 o'clock, the sound of tires crunched over the driveway. A silver SUV pulled up, its engine purring like confidence on wheels. The front door swung open before anyone could move. Vanessa strode in, sunglasses still on despite the gray sky, suitcase in hand, perfume trailing behind her. She looked radiant, tan from Miami, dressed in a white coat and heels that didn't belong anywhere near Wisconsin snow. "Well," she began brightly, dropping her bag by the door. "I see everyone decided to show up for my welcome home committee." No one spoke. Robert stood. "Sit down, Vanessa." Her smirk faltered at the tone of his voice. Still, she crossed her arms and leaned against the table instead of sitting. "What's this about? You look like you're about to deliver bad news." "Rob." Attorney Martinez closed the folder and met her eyes. "Mrs. Walker, we'd like to discuss your recent trip and the matters concerning your family. I suggest you listen carefully." Vanessa's gaze darted between them, a flicker of unease breaking through her mask. "What matters?" Robert didn't answer. He simply reached for the small recorder on the table, pressed play, and stepped back. Vanessa's own voice filled the room, sharp and cruel. "Once the old woman dies. Half this house is mine anyway. The rest I'll sell. Maybe we'll buy something in Miami with a view." For a second, there was silence. Then Vanessa's hand flew to her chest. "That's out of context," she snapped. "I was joking. Come on, Rob, you know Martinez interrupted, his voice calm, almost gentle. "We also have records of your financial transfers, funds withdrawn from the joint account while you were in Miami, and text messages to Mr. Christopher Reynolds, confirming your intent to commit real estate fraud." Vanessa's confidence cracked. "That's ridiculous. You can't just—" But he continued, his tone unwavering. "You left your children for nearly 2 weeks without legal guardianship, instructed your son to conceal your location, and recorded your husband without consent. Under Wisconsin law, that constitutes both emotional neglect and invasion of privacy." Her lips parted, but no words came. Her gaze flicked to Robert, desperate now. "You're really going to do this? To me? After everything I've done for you?" Robert's voice was low, steady. "What you've done, Vanessa, is destroy everything that used to make us a family." Behind him, Diego stepped forward. He hadn't said a word the entire time. His voice was small but clear. "Mom, Grandma didn't do anything wrong." The words seemed to pierce deeper than any accusation. Vanessa turned to him, eyes wide. "Diego." "Sweetheart," he shook his head and took Kate's hand. "You shouldn't have said those things about her." Something inside Vanessa collapsed then. Her shoulders dropped. Her eyes darted helplessly around the room, but no one moved to comfort her. The silence pressed in until even her breathing sounded out of place. Martinez slid a folder toward her. "These are the divorce papers, Mrs. Walker. We recommend you sign now. If you refuse, we'll proceed through court filings with full evidence disclosure." For a long moment, Vanessa just stared at the papers. Then, without another word, she took the pen, her hand trembling as she signed her name. When she looked up, Kate met her eyes for the first time. "This could have ended differently," Kate said quietly. "But you chose the lesson the hard way." No shouting followed. No dramatic exit. Vanessa gelled her bait, her coats, her sunglasses, everything that no longer belonged there, and walked out into the falling snow. The door closed softly behind her. Inside, no one spoke for several seconds. The only sound was the faint hiss of the radiator and the wind brushing against the window panes. Robert finally exhaled. "It's over," he said. Kate shook her head gently. "No, dear, it's only the beginning." Outside, the snow kept falling, soft, endless, and cleansing. Winter came late that year, soft and forgiving, as if Wisconsin itself wanted to give the Walkers a gentle beginning after all the storms. Months had passed since that afternoon when Vanessa walked out into the snow. And the world inside the small wooden house had changed in quiet, beautiful ways. Robert now had full custody of the children. The court's decision had come swiftly after reviewing the evidence attorney Martinez presented. There had been no drama in the courtroom, no shouting or tears, just a judge's measured voice declaring what everyone already knew, that the children belonged in a home filled with care, not manipulation. Vanessa didn't fight. She simply signed what needed signing and left the state soon after, reportedly chasing another new start. She left behind little more than credit card debt and a silence no one missed. Kate had moved in with her son and grandchildren shortly after. At first, she worried she might be intruding, an old woman stepping into a young family space. But Robert had insisted. "This is your home too, Mom. It always was." And so, her mornings filled with purpose again. She cooked oatmeal before the school bus arrived, packed lunches with handwritten notes, and made sure Matt's scarf was always snug before he ran out the door. The kitchen, once a place of tension, now smelled of cinnamon, toast, and laughter. Sophia, who had once rolled her eyes at everything, became her shadow in the kitchen. "Grandma Katie, can I try the frosting today?" she'd ask, holding the whisk like it was a paintbrush. She burned the cookies twice, overmixed the batter once, but when the first perfect cake came out of the oven, golden, soft, sweet, her smile was worth every failure. Diego, quieter but more focused than ever, joined his school's robotics club. He spent hours building and tinkering at the kitchen table. Wires and small motors scattered across the surface. "You know," he said one evening, not looking up from his project, "Mom never cared about this stuff. She just wanted trophies. But you just ask if I'm having fun." Kate smiled, brushing a hand over his shoulder. "Because that's what matters." And little Matt, sweet, wide-eyed Matt, spent every afternoon in the backyard, even when the air turned cold. He planted sunflower seeds along the fence line. "For Grandma's birds," he said. When the first green shoots broke through the soil, he clapped his hands in delight. Life settled into a rhythm again. Not perfect, not untouched by the past, but steady. Healing didn't come with grand gestures. It came in the sound of children laughing, the smell of something baking, the hum of a sewing machine in the evening. One night, snow began to fall again, soft and endless, dusting the windows with white. The family gathered by the fireplace, Robert reading paperwork for his new teaching position, Sophia sketching designs for her next cake, Diego explaining circuits to Matt, who listened with his chin propped in his hands. Kate sat in her armchair, wrapped in a knitted shawl, watching them with quiet pride. Her heart was full, not with triumph, but with peace. All the years of silence, of being dismissed and humiliated, now felt distant, like an old scar that no longer hurt when touched. She looked toward the window, where the snow drifted lazily under the streetlight, and whispered to herself, "Some lessons aren't written on paper. They're lived." She smiled then, a small, private smile, and leaned back in her chair. Justice hadn't come with vengeance or fire. It had come softly, through truth, through love, through patience. It had rebuilt what deceit tried to destroy. As the clock ticked and laughter filled the room once more, she closed her eyes and thought, justice doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like winter snow covering everything that once hurt.